I feel we're innately good. I feel we've made mistakes. I feel we've done terrible things. But I can't accept that fundamental guilt in myself.
Right.
And so I left the church and went on the path to the academic world. And I went to Bryn Mawr College. And at Bryn Mawr College, I wondered how you could study the future of humanity. How could you study where the human race is going?
They didn't offer courses.
No, there was geometry and English and French and literature. And actually, it was an unaskable question rather than even an unanswerable one.
I suppose it's fair to say in parenthesis that today there are colleges that offer courses in future studies, and I suppose it's because of efforts such as your own that those courses exist now.
We're really just beginning because, of course, now we see that we're affecting the future by everything we're doing. And so, but it's still, even in the futurist movement, very hard to collectively imagine the potentiality of this whole system that we would be going toward. Because we have a lot of images of breakdown, of environmental breakdown, of Armageddon, of social collapse, but where is the image of a positive future equal to our spiritual, scientific, and social powers? It's still hidden.
So at one point you began by writing letters to some of the great public figures of the day, asking them if they had a vision for a positive future.
I did, and just to back up one step before that, after my efforts at Bryn Mawr and the church and so forth, I got married. And I married a man who is an artist. And when I met him in a little cafe on the left bank in Paris, I was asking him what I asked all the young men I met, is what do you think is the purpose of life and what's your purpose? And he completely surprised me by saying, I'm an artist and my purpose is to find a new image of humanity commensurate with our power to shape the future. And it flashed in my mind, I'm going to marry you. And I did. And we got married on the quest for a new image of man commensurate with our powers. That was in 1951. But that was the time of abstract expressionism and absurdism, and the image, Earl said to me the very first day we met, he said, if you look at Michelangelo's David, you would see the human as an integrated individual with the divine and the human integrated. And then look through modern art, Monet, Manet, Pissarro, it's all breaking up into points. Picasso, it's all going like this.
One can see a breakdown of the classical Renaissance images.
Jackson Pollock was just like scattered paint. And then there would be, at that time, empty white canvases. And
minimalist art.
And Earl said, we have lost our image of ourselves, and we have lost our story. For example, he said when Homer was translated in 5th century Greece, they had a story of the Greek myths. And a culture was able to form around a shared story. When the Gospels were written down, there was a story. Christ was born and all of these things happened. And culture formed around the Gospels. Then we had the Renaissance and science and the idea of human progress through greater knowledge. And that carried us up till about the time of the atomic bomb, when I was 15. And suddenly we saw scientific progress, technological progress, could lead to disaster.
And a sense of cultural nihilism.
Cultural nihilism, economic and ecological collapse, alienation of the spirit.
Where people just didn't accept the heroes, the myths, the stories of the past. They all seem to be misguided or jaded somehow.
And the world will end not with a bang but a whimper, the whole Eliot thing when I was growing up in the early 50s. And Earl said that we needed a new story. Now this is fairly familiar now. But that was 1949 when he was saying it.
And at the same time, I suppose it's fair to say that marriages of the 1950s were rather conventional by today's standards.
Well, here's the interesting thing, Jeffrey. We got married on an unconventional question, but we had a conventional marriage. Because the minute I got married, I became the wife. And I'll never forget my shock at waking up and being Mrs. Earl Hubbard rather than Barbara Marx. And I can remember thinking, where did I go? And that whole thing, even now, about the name change. And then I immediately shifted into a new role, which I was wife, and then I got pregnant, and then I was mother.
5 children.
I had 5 children, and I lost the question. And I almost lost my soul. even though I loved my husband and loved my children. And in my early 30s, I really felt like I was dying. And there I was on the external level with wonderful children and a husband I loved, but dying inside. And I'll tell you what saved my life. The first lifesaver was Abraham Maslow's Toward a Psychology of Being.
Yes. Maslow was a big influence in my life as well. He's the one who suggested to me that mystical experiences and experiences of the divine, of the sacred, of the supernatural were not necessarily remnants of irrationality and superstition, but were experiences had by the great achievers and creative people of our culture.
Exactly. And for me, the key point that he made was that in studying well people,
Yes.
self-actualizing people, he found they all had one trait in common. They all had work that they considered intrinsically valuable and self-rewarding.
Yes, that's the whole idea of self-actualization.
Self-actualization and chosen vocation seemed psychologically to be connected.
Yes.
So I suddenly saw my problem, in quotes, was that I had not found my vocation. Motherhood is not necessarily a vocation. Now, 30 years later, when people choose to have a child, parenting is becoming a vocation because it's chosen.
It's a choice.
But I was the last generation to have babies without thinking.
That what Margaret Mead called mindless fecundity.
I was one of them. I mean, just because, you know what? We didn't know what else to do. And I didn't have babies because I thought I should be a mother, or even, I loved my children, but I really wasn't innately a mother.
You were living out a pattern unthinkingly.
Unthinkingly, and I was trying so hard to live up to a cultural image of someone who was completely happy taking care of children and taking care of her husband. But actually, I was miserable.
You were dying inside.
I was dying inside, and when I read Maslow, and I realized my problem was I had not found my vocation, I began to get a plus sign to all my problems. Instead of the Freudian analysis, which is I'm sick, I'm neurotic. Maslow, as you know, said the higher growth needs are not neuroses, they are normal. So I normalized my desire for something more.
Yes.
Instead of putting a negative, I put a plus on it.
And this is when you began
Then
writing.
I began, and I want to tell you the
Yes.
first answer to my question, what is the meaning of our power, came from Maslow for me, which is the meaning of our power is to release the individual creative potential of each of us for chosen work. Because if you live in a very traditional society and you have no mobility, no education, live short lives, you don't have a chance to find that unique creative potential.
Right.
So I realized, because I was in a society that had this affluence, and this goes, you don't have to be rich, almost everyone in a modern society has a chance, if they take it, to look for that unique potential and start to find out what to do.